Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be diving into our second topic in developmental psychology, and that is cognitive development, the way that we change mentally over the course of our lifespan, really paying specific attention to Piaget's stages of cognitive development. So let's go ahead and take a look. Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist who studied the cognitive development of individuals over their lifespan, how they changed from infants all the way into adulthood. And to remember the 4 stages that he created to describe the changes that take place cognitively as we develop, we have a fantastic mnemonic device for you. It is: some pigs can fly, others eat canned ham. Now you may be wondering, what in the world does that sentence mean? Some pigs can fly, others eat canned ham. It's essentially a shortcut to help us remember the first letter of each stage of Piaget's cognitive development and one of the key characteristics of that stage. So some pigs can fly stands for sensorimotor, preoperational, concrete, and formal. Those are the 4 stages in order of cognitive development. Now, others eat canned ham go along with those 4 stages. So under sensorimotor, one of the key characteristics is the concept of object permanence. In preoperational, we have egocentrism. In concrete, we have conservatism. And in formal, we have hypothetical reasoning. And so these are some of the key cognitive changes that take place throughout each stage. It's not the only thing that happens in each stage though. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a closer look at what actually happens in each stage of development. So our first stage is the sensorimotor stage, and this is approximately birth to age 2. And this is a time where babies are really starting to understand their world through their physical interaction with it. They don't have words yet to place upon objects. Instead, they are really navigating their world through their senses, hence sensorimotor. Think about how babies at this stage will constantly put things in their mouth, play with objects such as blocks, knocking them over, really interacting in a physical manner with the world. One of the key characteristics that happens during this stage is they develop a sense of object permanence, meaning they understand that just because an object is no longer present, that it still exists in the physical world. Think about a child who's very, very young. When you hide their toy, they think it's gone forever. But as they start to age, they start to understand just because they can't see it doesn't mean it ceases to exist. From ages 2 to about 6 is when a child is in the preoperational stage. And again, one of the key characteristics of that stage is known as egocentrism, which is a failure to take on another person's perspective. Think about how at this age, a child really thinks about the world through their own point of view. About halfway through this stage, they'll develop what's known as theory of mind, which is where they can start to take on someone else's perspective. Some of the other concepts that take place in this preoperational stage are things like animism and artificialism, where children believe that all objects have life. Their dolly has a boo-boo, for example, and artificialism, that all actions in the world come from humans of some kind. So a child might try to explain why it's raining with thunder by saying that there are giants in the sky that are bowling, or the grass is growing because there are tiny little gnomes pushing the grass up from in the dirt. These types of explanations happen often in that preoperational stage. From ages 6 to 12 is when we start to see the concrete stage. And this is where children start to think in more concrete terms. They can start to follow basic instructions. They can understand order of events. and they can do math problems such as addition and subtraction. One of the cognitive concepts that starts to develop throughout this stage is the concept known as conservatism. So as they learn to classify things by shape, color, and other types of characteristics, they start to understand that just because something changes shape, it does not change its property. So a piece of clay rolled up into a ball, or a piece of clay rolled into the shape of a snake, have the same amount of clay in it, is the idea of conservatism. And then from about age 12 and into adulthood, we enter into the formal operational stage. And this is where we develop what's known as hypothetical reasoning, where a child can start to think about concepts in a more abstract format, such as justice or what is fairness. Early in this stage as well, we also see the development of what's known as the personal fable, where someone believes in their own uniqueness. So think about a preteen or early teenager who thinks nobody understands me or nobody thinks like me. It can also lead to more risky types of behavior by thinking nothing bad will happen to me. Another early characteristic of this stage is what's known as the imaginary audience, where adolescents often also think that people are thinking about them more often than they actually are. So someone who falls in the hallway at school, for example, thinks that for the rest of the day, that's all anybody is talking about. When in reality, because everybody's in this formal operational stage, everybody's actually only thinking about themselves. There are a few other cognitive vocab terms that we want to be familiar with as well, and some of these are a bit of a review from our earlier units. Schema, for example, if you remember from our memory unit, is our mental set. It is our expectation of what things should be based on our previous experiences. Essentially, it is a set of images or concepts that fit into a category. And so when we are building our understanding of our world, we are developing schemas for different categories of information. As we are building our schemas, we will see a concept known as assimilation. And in developmental psychology, this is when a child is going to add things into their existing schema. So say a child learns what a dog is, and so every dog they see out on a walk, they point to and they say dog, 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 right? They are adding all of those other dogs into their schema of what a dog is. And then maybe let's say they see a cat for the first time and they point to it and they say dog, right? That is the idea of assimilation, adding things into an existing schema, although sometimes a mistake is going to be made. So when this schema is corrected, when someone says, no, that's not a dog, that's a cat, now what we see is a concept known as accommodation. And that is when they either change a category to accommodate this new information or create an entirely new category. So now the child might have a schema for dogs and another schema for cats, and they might also have a broader category for pets. And now dogs and cats can all fit into that category. An easy way to remember the difference between assimilation and accommodation is looking at the second and third letters in both of those words. So for assimilation, the SS stands for same schema, that you are adding something into the same schema. And then the CC of accommodation can either be change or create a category. So when you either have to change that category, make it broader to incorporate the new information, or create an entirely new category to contain that new information you have gained, that would be accommodation. Some other cognitive development vocab terms are things like habituation, where we get progressively used to things the more we see them, and we create less neural connections when that happens, which is why babies need novelty. Every experience that they have is a brand new experience for them. They're experiencing it for the first time. And so that is why they constantly need new experiences, new images, new things to look at and interact with, because each one is creating a new neural network. And that constant re-exposure to the same one will eventually lessen its impact. It's not as exciting anymore. Habituation even happens to us in adulthood. If you think about the first firework on the 4th of July causing a startle, but then the subsequent fireworks that follow don't have quite the same effect, right? It's not new anymore. Your brain isn't as on high alert about it as it was before. That would be habituation. Infants also develop what's known as the visual cliff during this stage. And that is an experiment that was used to prove that depth perception may be learned rather than innate. In this experiment, they have children walk across or crawl across a clear blue-side plastic table where half of it is covered in a checkered tablecloth, and then there is a significant drop-off where the tablecloth continues on the floor. Babies at the very beginning of their crawling will crawl directly across this visual cliff without really giving it a second thought. But as time goes on, those babies who have been crawling for a while will often get to the edge of the visual cliff and will stop crawling. They will not continue because they can now perceive and understand that that change in perception, the change in distance of that tablecloth means that they might fall. And so it tells us that there is some level of perception that is learned as time goes on. And finally, we're going to end today with a little criticism of Piaget. And that was done by a man named Lev Vygotsky. And Vygotsky felt that Piaget's stages were too focused on the individual, and that oftentimes children are able to learn these different cognitive milestones faster than what Piaget initially said when using social interaction. And he referred to this as the zone of proximal development, that instead of specific stages, there is sort of a zone in which a child can begin to understand a specific concept. And oftentimes through inner dialogue or with talking to others, with help, a child might actually be able to grasp a concept faster than originally indicated in Piaget's cognitive stages. So that's where we're going to go ahead and stop for today. In our next video, we're going to move on to attachment and moral development before starting to move on to some of the social developmental stages. So thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember, be kind to your mind.